You explain yourself too much. You don't even notice it anymore. It's automatic, a twitch of the soul. A reflex that kicks in the moment someone tilts their head and says, "How are you?" And before you can stop it, your mouth fills the room. You clarify. You justify. You unravel stories, dragging your heart behind your words like a prisoner in chains. You narrate your pain like a defense lawyer pleading your own worth. As if telling the story right, the long version, the deeper context, the just so timed pauses, will finally earn you permission to exist without shame. But the more you talk, the emptier you feel. Because deep down, you know something sacred is being hollowed out, not shared, leaked. And what you're really asking isn't, "Do you understand me?" It's, "Am I still real if I stop speaking?" What you fear isn't just silence, it's erasure. Because somewhere along the way, you were taught that your worth is your ability to explain, to entertain, to articulate your brokenness so eloquently that no one mistakes it for need. You were rewarded for being self-aware, but punished for being too much. You were told you were smart, but only when your pain came with a thesis. You were told to share, but only if it made other people comfortable. So now you overtalk. Not because you have too much to say, but because you're terrified of what might rise in the stillness once you stop. The truth is, you don't talk because you're sure. You talk because you're afraid. Afraid of being misunderstood because you've been misnamed your whole life. Afraid of being dismissed because your silence has always been interpreted as weakness. Afraid of being forgotten because the last time you were quiet, they never came back to ask why. But most of all, you're afraid of silence. Not because it's empty, but because it's full. Full of everything you've been running from. Full of feelings that don't have names. Full of questions you've avoided for years by keeping your mouth moving. Silence is not absence. Silence is presence. And that terrifies you, because words let you control the narrative. But silence forces you to confront the raw, unedited version of yourself, and maybe you're not ready for that yet. Maybe none of us are. But if you ever want to stop performing your pain, if you ever want to feel whole, not just heard, you have to go there. Into the place where words run out, and the real conversation begins. There's a reason you can't stop explaining. Why every conversation, no matter how simple, turns into a performance. Why you catch yourself rambling, oversharing, circling back just to make sure they really get it. Why, after every vulnerable moment, you walk away with that hollow ache, like you gave too much and still weren't understood. It's not that you talk too much. That's just the symptom, the surface, the visible flare of something far more ancient. The truth is, you doubt yourself deeply, and your voice, instead of being an expression, has become a shield, a crutch, a desperate hand reaching out for proof that you still matter. Words are your lifeline, but not because they free you, because they distract you from the part of you that doesn't feel real unless it's being explained, from the fear that your silence means you've disappeared again. You explain because somewhere in your past, your feelings were put on trial. Your truth was cross-examined, and your worth became conditional negotiable. You learned that to be believed, you had to perform your pain. You had to polish it, wrap it in logic, make it palatable, make it small. So now, every time you speak, You lace your truth with disclaimers. You pre-apologize. You laugh at your own seriousness. You rush to make it okay for them, even when it's not okay for you. Because if you sound too sure, they might call you arrogant. If you speak too plainly, they might think you're unstable. If you stop mid-sentence, they might stop loving you altogether. So you fill the silence. You explain not to connect, but to survive. You narrate because the child inside you still believes that being misunderstood is the same as being abandoned. And that's not communication, that's performance. That's trauma with a microphone. That's fear disguised as eloquence. You say so much, but hear so little of yourself. Because somewhere in the noise, you've forgotten what it feels like to speak from stillness, to trust that your truth doesn't need to be argued, packaged, or proven. It only needs to be honored. And until you can sit in your truth without narrating it, you'll keep mistaking over-explanation for authenticity. But authenticity isn't loud. It's not persuasive. It doesn't repeat itself. It just is. Still, simple, sacred. Epictetus once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." But this isn't about being polite. This is about being present. He would tell you, every time you flood a room with your voice, you're not proving your strength. You're revealing your wound. Because the wise don't need to explain, the centered don't need to convince. Only the frightened fill silence with noise. If your words feel frantic, if they come not from clarity, but from urgency, then pause. Because that's not your voice, that's your survival instinct. That's the child who wasn't heard, the teenager who had to overachieve, the adult who now confuses talking with being understood. Epictetus would say, "You're not free until you can be quiet without shame." Epictetus once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." It sounds simple, but this isn't about manners. It's not about waiting your turn or being agreeable. It's about something far more sacred: presence. Because to listen, truly listen, is to risk being changed, and to speak less is not weakness. It's a quiet kind of power. Epictetus would look at you, frantic, over-explaining, trying to prove your worth with every syllable, and he would not interrupt. He would wait. And then he would say, "You think you are sharing wisdom, but you are broadcasting your wound." Because every time you flood a room with your voice, you're not proving your strength, you're revealing your fear. The fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being invisible, the fear that if you stop talking, you might vanish. We are terrified of silence, because silence asks us to be enough without performance. And most of us don't know how to do that. But Epictetus would remind you, the wise don't need to explain. They don't need to be right. They don't need to be believed. They are not here to impress. The centered don't argue. They observe. They leave space. They speak like the sea speaks slow, certain, unafraid to be misheard. Only the frightened fill silence with noise. Only the wounded rush to be understood. Only the insecure decorate their sentences with urgency. If your words feel frantic, if you speak not from clarity but from compulsion, pause, not to edit yourself, but to feel what's really driving the impulse, because that's not your voice. That's your survival instinct. That's the child who learned that being quiet meant being forgotten. That's the teenager who only got attention when they excelled. That's the adult who now mistakes articulation for identity. Epictetus would not comfort you with flattery. He would challenge you with stillness. He would ask, "Can you sit with your truth without explaining it?" Because you are not free until you can be quiet without shame. Until you can feel the urge to speak, to justify, to defend, to dazzle, and let it pass like a wave. Until you can feel misunderstood and not rush to clarify. Until you can be unseen and still know you exist. Freedom is not found in expression. It's found in restraint. In the space between the impulse and the action. And when you master that space, you no longer speak to be heard. You speak when silence has nothing more to teach. There comes a moment in every journey where you grow tired of performing. Tired of talking just to fill the empty spaces. Tired of explaining to prove you exist. Tired of the endless dance of words that leaves you feeling both heard and unheard at once. And in that moment, something shifts inside you. You begin to say less. Not because you've forgotten how to speak, but because you've rediscovered how to listen. You watch yourself interrupt and choose not to. You feel the urge to explain yourself away, and you resist. It's not a retreat, not a withdrawal from the world or from others. It's a return. A return to something quieter, deeper. Something that has always been within you, waiting for the noise to fade so it could be heard. Because real confidence doesn't need to raise its voice. Real truth doesn't need a sales pitch. It doesn't need to be shaped, defended, or packaged for others. It stands on its own, a quiet, steady force. Real presence is quiet, still, grounded. It doesn't fight for space. It simply fills it with being. And as you grow in this new silence, you'll begin to notice the world differently. You'll notice who speaks only to be heard, who uses words as a mask for insecurity, who fills every silence with their own need to be seen. And you'll notice who speaks because they have something to say, who chooses their words like they're precious, who speaks not to impress, but to connect. You won't want to be the first kind, not because it's wrong, but because it no longer feels true. Because the more you listen to yourself, the more you crave authenticity in others. Eventually, you'll understand. Talking doesn't always connect, but silence reveals. Silence shows you who listens, who stays without needing to speak, who feels you without needing to fix you. It shows you who understands the power of presence, who doesn't need to rush in with solutions, but can simply be with you in the stillness. And it will also show you who needs your words more than they need your presence. The ones who are afraid of silence, the ones who can't stand the discomfort of not knowing. The ones who fill the air with noise because they don't know how to be without it. And when you see that, you'll begin to understand. True connection isn't about talking, it's about being. And sometimes being is enough. The more you speak less, the more you see. You see yourself, you see the others. You see the spaces between the words, and in that silence, you'll find the world is already whole. Today, say less, not to be mysterious, not to withdraw, not as some hollow spiritual trick. Say less as an act of devotion to yourself, to the parts of you that have always been spoken over, even by your own voice. Say less not as punishment, but as freedom. Let them misinterpret you. Let them wonder what you meant. Let them sit with their own discomfort. Not every wound needs to be translated. Not every feeling needs to be narrated. Let some things go unexplained. Not because they don't matter, but because they are sacred. And sacred things don't survive overexposure. Let silence be uncomfortable. Let it press against your ribs. Let it rise in your throat like something unspoken, because that's exactly what it is. You've spent so long defending yourself with well-timed stories, with polished pain, with the perfect sentence at the perfect moment, hoping someone would finally say, "I see you." But the self you are defending with all these words doesn't need defending. It needs remembering. And the less you talk, the more you'll hear it. That voice beneath the voice. That quiet knowing that never argued, never begged, never performed. The truth beneath the performance. The presence that was always there when you ran out of things to say. The self that doesn't need to be believed, just felt, just known, just still. So today, try saying less. Let silence become your sanctuary. Let it strip away what was never yours. Let it be awkward. Let it be raw. And in that silence, if you listen closely enough, you may hear it, not a quote, not a thought, not even a word, but a return to the voice you had before the world told you who to be.